The first thing people notice is not the blood, or the screaming, or the way bodies come apart with surgical elegance. It is the smile, too composed, too deliberate, a smile that does not belong to a hero basking in applause, nor to a monster reveling in chaos, but to something older and far more dangerous. A mind that believes it understands humanity better than humanity understands itself. In a world already ruled by manufactured gods and corporate lies, that smile is the most terrifying thing imaginable, because it does not want to rule this world. It wants to improve it, and improvement in the wrong hands has always been the most efficient form of cruelty. If this descent into power, manipulation, and quiet horror grips you, if you want to explore these dark intersections where superhuman arrogance collides with something far more calculating, then stay with this channel. Share this story with those who understand that the most frightening villains are not driven by rage, but by purpose. Subscribe, not as a habit, but as an agreement to keep returning to these uncomfortable places where heroes fracture and monsters speak softly. Mr. Sinister does not arrive in a burst of light or a tear in the sky. There is no thunder, no omen dramatic enough to satisfy superstition. He arrives the way diseases often do, quietly, unnoticed, already adapting to the environment by the time anyone realizes something is wrong. One moment, the world of corporate heroes and manufactured miracles continues along its well-oiled tracks. The next, a man with porcelain skin, crimson eyes, and a perfectly tailored coat is standing beneath a flickering street lamp, breathing in a city that smells of rot disguised as perfume. He smiles. The city offers itself willingly. Billboards glow with grinning Supes promising safety. Sirens sing their nightly hymns. Somewhere nearby, a drunk laughs too loudly, confident that heroes exist to clean up consequences. Mr. Sinister tilts his head, listening, already parsing the soundscape like data. This world is loud but shallow, a cacophony of power without discipline. He finds it almost charming. He walks. As he moves, the air around him seems to sharpen, as though reality itself is paying closer attention. Screens glitch for half a second when he passes. Reflections linger an instant too long. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would make a camera operator look twice. Sinister understands optics better than most tyrants understand fear. You do not announce yourself to a system built on spectacle. You study it. You let it show you where it is weakest. He learns quickly. Within hours, he understands that this world's gods are not born of accident or cosmic decree, but of process. Chemicals, conditioning, branding, a corporate assembly line masquerading as destiny. The revelation delights him, not because it shocks him, very little does, but because it confirms something he has long suspected. This universe has confused power with intention, strength with purpose. It has elevated children with unstable psyches and given them godhood, then acted surprised when they behave like monsters. Mr. Sinister has spent lifetimes correcting such mistakes. He slips into places that matter. Research annexes, data vaults, private clinics with names designed to sound benevolent. No alarms sound, no guards fall. He does not need to force entry when doors open themselves for those who understand systems. By dawn, he has read more about Compound V than most of its creators. He hums softly as he scrolls through genetic breakdowns, neural mapping, long-term instability reports buried beneath legal jargon and non-disclosure agreements. Fascinating, he thinks, sloppy, inspired but rushed. This world did not perfect its gods, it mass-produced them. That is when he understands the real flaw, not the violence, not the corruption. Those are symptoms. The flaw is inefficiency. So much power wasted on spectacle, on fear, on maintaining myths that crumble the moment someone asks the wrong question. Vought does not rule through absolute control. It rules through narrative, and narrative is brittle. By the time the sun rises, Mr. Sinister has already decided he will not destroy this world. He will refine it. His first subject is unremarkable. A mid-tier supe whose abilities peak at enhanced reflexes and cosmetic invulnerability. popular enough to sell merchandise, disposable enough to silence if needed. Sinister observes him from across a rooftop as the man rehearses lines for a morning interview, smiling at nothing, adjusting his costume in the glass of a nearby building. Sinister watches the micro-twitches, the suppressed anxiety, the subtle tremor of someone terrified that without applause he is nothing. Ah, Sinister murmurs, there it is. The encounter lasts less than a minute. No fight, no screams. The Supe never even realizes what is happening. One moment he is alone, the next he is not. Sinister's touch is precise, invasive in a way that bypasses pain and goes straight to truth. He reads the genetic shortcuts, the chemical reinforcements, the decay already setting in beneath the surface. He adjusts a single variable, something so minor it feels insulting. Then he steps back. The Supe collapses, alive, breathing, but changed. When he wakes hours later in a hospital bed, his powers will still be there, stronger even, but they will no longer respond to panic, or rage, or ego. They will respond only to deliberate intent, to restraint, to control. Vought will call it a miracle when the test results come back. A sudden stabilization, anomalous improvement. They will never trace it back to a man who doesn't exist in their databases. They will not realize someone has begun editing their gods like faulty code. Mr. Sinister watches from the shadows as doctors rush in, already bored with the outcome. One success means nothing. Trends matter. Patterns, proof. Above the city, a familiar figure streaks across the sky, cape snapping like a banner. Homelander, radiant and lethal, pauses midair, frowning for reasons he cannot articulate. Something about the city feels observed, evaluated. Far below, Mr. Sinister looks up, meeting Homelander's gaze through layers of concrete and ego, his smile widening just slightly. "Oh," he whispers, "you're going to be exquisite." And with that, he turns away, already planning the next phase of an experiment that will not end with applause, but with understanding. Vought notices the anomaly 3 days later, which is to say they notice the paperwork before they notice the person. Charts stabilize where they should not. Long-term degradation curves flatten without explanation. A compliance report flags the mid-tier Supe as an outlier, not because he misbehaves, but because he suddenly stops improvising. His interviews grow measured. His rescues become efficient rather than theatrical. He pauses before acting, as if listening to a voice no one else can hear. The handlers exchange uneasy looks, unpredictability they can manage, self-control unsettles them. They run additional scans, nothing obvious surfaces, compound V signatures remain intact, no external tampering detected. The conclusion, reluctantly filed and quietly buried, is that sometimes miracles happen. Vought has always been comfortable with miracles, so long as they can be monetized. Mr. Sinister watches the response with interest from a borrowed office overlooking the river, its windows tinted to keep the city at a polite distance. He has acquired the space under a shell company in under an hour, complete with a skeleton staff who will forget his face as soon as he leaves the room. He sits at a desk that still smells of fresh varnish, reviewing live feeds and internal memos, the corners of his mouth curved in mild amusement. The experiment was never about improvement alone. It was about reaction. A system that truly understands its own power would recoil at an uncontrolled variable. This one rationalizes it, smooths it over, celebrates it. That tells him everything he needs to know about how deep the rot runs. He widens the aperture. The next adjustments are subtler, scattered across departments and districts like seeds tossed into different soils. A Supe with chronic rage episodes finds his adrenal spikes dampened, replaced by a cold, surgical calm that terrifies his teammates more than his tantrums ever did. A celebrity darling whose powers falter under scrutiny discovers she can no longer perform without focus, her strength abandoning her when she reaches for applause instead of purpose. None of them know why. All of them feel exposed. Patterns emerge. Public perception shifts in small, confusing ways. Viewers complain that something feels off. Heroes seem less fun, less relatable. Focus groups struggle to articulate the discomfort, circling words like sterile and intense without understanding why. Vought's marketing division scrambles, pushing brighter colors, louder campaigns, anything to drown out the sense that their gods are becoming disciplined. That is when Mr. Sinister introduces friction. He leaks nothing directly. He nudges. Anonymously, a set of internal projections surfaces on a message board frequented by junior analysts, questioning whether compound V instability is a feature rather than a flaw. Elsewhere, a whistleblower's testimony gains traction, not because it is shocking, but because it aligns too neatly with what people are beginning to sense. Truth, Sinister knows, is most effective when it arrives after intuition. Homelander feels the shift before anyone dares name it. He stands in a Vought tower gym, pulverizing reinforced steel with board efficiency, each strike landing exactly where intended. The mirrors reflect perfection back at him, but the echo feels hollow. The city outside looks smaller than it used to, not weaker, just knowable. He remembers the sensation from days earlier, that fleeting impression of being assessed rather than adored. Someone, he thinks, is watching the watchers. Mr. Sinister anticipates the thought like a scheduled appointment. He has already mapped Homelander's genome down to the aberrant redundancies that make him so catastrophically stable. He has reviewed footage of his childhood, the careful construction of a god who never learned the difference between love and leverage. There is no need to rush. One does not rush art. Instead, Sinister arranges a meeting. Not with Homelander, not yet, with someone adjacent, a scientist long since pushed aside for asking the wrong questions about dosage and ethics, a woman who drinks too much and keeps copies of files she should have destroyed. Sinister appears in her kitchen at midnight, sitting at the table like a guest who arrived early. She screams, he waits. When she stops, when shock drains into exhausted curiosity, he speaks gently, offering her tea that steams despite the cold burner. He tells her nothing she doesn't already suspect. He simply arranges her thoughts in a way that makes denial impossible. He leaves her with a single page of equations she will spend the rest of her life understanding. By morning she will be dead, an apparent suicide, tragic, unavoidable. The page will survive. Mr. Sinister does not mourn. He catalogs outcomes. By the end of the week, Vought's internal cohesion begins to strain. Departments blame one another for subtle failures. Supes argue over methods. Control rooms bristle with whispered theories. Somewhere in the noise, someone says the word interference and no one laughs. Sinister stands once more beneath that same flickering street lamp where he first arrived, watching the city cycle through another night of curated heroics. He feels no urgency. No hunger, only satisfaction at the elegance of a system revealing its seams. This, he murmurs to the empty street, is where it gets interesting. High above, Homelander floats against the clouds, eyes scanning, senses straining for a threat that does not roar or glow. He cannot see Mr. Sinister. He cannot hear him, but he feels the outline of a challenge forming, precise and patient. For the first time in a long while, Homelander does not feel alone. And somewhere between intention and inevitability, the experiment advances to its next, more dangerous stage. Chaos occupation does not announce itself with banners or proclamations. It arrives first as a change in rhythm. The markets open later. The Vox speakers crackle longer before delivering their morning litanies. The patrol routes of the local enforcers become erratic, not because they have been overrun, but because they are suddenly unsure who they serve. Civilians feel it in the way doors stay closed an extra heartbeat, in the way prayers are whispered instead of spoken aloud. When the Imperium loses a world, it is rarely in a single, dramatic moment. It is lost in increments small enough to be mistaken for survival. At first, the people tell themselves nothing has changed. The manufactorum still belched smoke into a sky already ruined beyond recognition. Ration lines still coil through hab blocks like patient serpents. The Imperial Aquila still hangs from stained stone and rusted gantries, its wings chipped but recognizable. Faith, after all, is a habit as much as it is a conviction, and habits are hard to kill. Even when the first reports come in, of off-world astropaths gone silent, of Astra Militarum units failing to answer hails, the average citizen clings to routine with desperate insistence. Routine is proof that the world still exists. Then the sermons change. The ecclesiarchy priests do not vanish immediately. Some remain in their pulpits, voices hoarse as they strain to reassure congregations that the emperor protects, that trials are signs of attention rather than abandonment. But their words begin to drift, subtly at first, then more boldly. References to endurance give way to language about adaptation. Suffering is no longer framed as a test to be survived, but as a state to be understood. A few priests begin to speak of strength found not in obedience, but in acceptance of what is, rather than what was promised. Those sermons draw larger crowds. Fear has a way of sharpening attention. It is not the cultists who arrive first. It is the absence of consequence. Petty crimes go unpunished. Entire hab levels go weeks without Arbite's presence. When disputes turn violent, no one comes to separate the living from the dead. In the vacuum, local strongmen emerge, offering protection in exchange for loyalty, food, or silence. They paint over imperial iconography not out of rebellion but practicality. Symbols invite attention, and attention has become dangerous. Whispers spread through the underlevels, of figures who walk through fire without burning, of voices that speak inside the skull, promising relief from pain that prayer never delivered, of neighbors who disappear into the ruins beneath the city and return changed, eyes bright with something that looks disturbingly like purpose. No one calls it chaos at first. The word carries too much weight, too many punishments etched into collective memory. Instead, they call it help. The first overt signs come during the night. Lights flicker across entire districts as power grids fail in cascading waves. When the darkness settles, it does not feel empty. Shapes move where there should be none. Sounds carry strangely, bending around corners, stretching too long. A man swears he hears laughter echoing from a sealed shrine. A woman insists her dead child spoke to her from the shadow between two hab towers. These stories spread not because they are believed, but because they resonate. Everyone has lost something. Chaos, in its earliest phase, is simply the promise that loss might mean something. When the cult cells finally reveal themselves, they do so carefully. They do not tear down shrines. They incorporate them. Imperial prayers are reinterpreted, their words twisted just enough to align with new meanings. The emperor is no longer denied, merely reframed as distant, unknowable, perhaps incomplete without other forces balancing the universe. It is heresy delivered with a gentle voice, and it is devastatingly effective. Civilians adapt because they must. Those who refuse find themselves isolated, cut off from food or information. Those who comply gain small advantages: protection from roaming gangs, access to clean water, a sense of belonging that the Imperium has not offered them in generations. Children learn new symbols alongside the old ones, tracing 8-pointed stars in the dust when they think no one is watching. Parents pretend not to notice, because noticing would require action, and action requires courage few can afford. The atmosphere of the city changes. The air feels heavier, charged with an undercurrent of anticipation. Murals appear overnight on bomb-scarred walls, depicting impossible figures crowned in flame or shadow, their forms half hidden by stylized script. The imagery is unsettling but compelling, promising transformation rather than mere survival. Even those who hate it cannot stop looking. In the upper spires, remnants of the planetary government argue over response protocols that no longer matter. Voxcasters fail mid-transmission. Astropathic attempts go unanswered. Somewhere beyond the void, the Imperium still wages its endless wars, unaware or unwilling to acknowledge that this world is slipping from its grasp. For the people on the ground, that distance feels absolute. And beneath it all, something listens. Not a single entity, not a singular will, but a convergence of hungers and intentions pressing closer, testing the boundaries of reality like fingers probing a wound. Civilians feel it as dreams that linger too long after waking, as urges that feel both alien and deeply personal. Chaos does not conquer with armies alone. It invites. By the time the first true demonic manifestation occurs, tearing its way into a collapsed transit tunnel amid screams and fire, the city is already lost in everything but name. The question is no longer whether the Imperium will return. It is whether anyone here still wants it to. The first demonic incursion does not feel like an invasion. It feels like a revelation arriving too late to be stopped. By the time the tunnel collapses and something impossibly wrong claws its way into the open, the people closest to it already sense what is coming. Their screams are not only fear. They are recognition. The air curdles, thick with heat and ozone, and reality buckles as though it has been carrying a weight it can no longer support. Those who survive the initial rupture flee not just from the creature itself, but from the certainty that the world they knew has finally broken its last promise. In the days that follow, the city does not descend into chaos. It stabilizes. That is what terrifies the survivors most. The cult networks move openly now, no longer hiding behind half-remembered symbols or coded language. They organize patrols, distribute food, enforce curfews. Their enforcers are brutal but predictable, and predictability is a luxury the Imperium rarely afforded its citizens. Where Arbites once arrived late and punished indiscriminately, the new order rewards compliance swiftly. Those who resist vanish, not in public displays of terror, but quietly, efficiently, as if they had simply been erased from the city's accounting. Faith becomes transactional. Shrines are rededicated, not demolished. Imperial aquila are left intact but defaced subtly, their wings reshaped, their eyes altered, their inscriptions reinterpreted. Sermons speak of balance, of strength through surrender, of truths the Imperium hid because it feared them. Civilians listen because the sermons acknowledge their suffering without dismissing it as necessary collateral. Chaos does not tell them their pain is noble. It tells them their pain is power. The effects seep into daily life. Workers report to manufactorums that now run on erratic schedules, producing weapons and artifacts whose purposes are never fully explained. The machines behave strangely, responding to whispered commands, emitting sounds that resemble breath or distant chanting. Some laborers swear the machine spirits have changed, grown attentive, almost eager. Others refuse to speak of it at all, afraid that numbing the change will make it permanent. Children adapt fastest. They learn which streets are safe, which symbols grant protection, which words must never be spoken aloud. Games incorporate new rituals, mock invocations traced into dust or ash. To them, the presence that watches from the shadows is not a horror, but a constant, like gravity or hunger. Parents notice the difference and say nothing. Survival has taught them that silence is safer than correction. Those who remember the Imperium clearly suffer the most. Former administratum clerks cling to outdated records, trying to maintain a sense of order through paperwork no one respects anymore. Retired Astra Militarum veterans wake screaming from dreams of wars that now feel distant and irrelevant. They are dangerous to the new regime, not because of their skills, but because they remember a time when obedience meant something different. Many are quietly removed, offered one final choice between conversion and disappearance. The warp's influence grows more overt with each passing cycle. Mutations appear, at first subtle enough to be hidden beneath robes or armor, eyes that reflect light oddly, fingers that bend too far back, voices that carry harmonics no human throat should produce. Those afflicted are not shunned. They are elevated. Proof, the cult leaders claim, that the gods reward devotion. Watching neighbors ascend in status through visible change does something corrosive to the unaltered. Envy mixes with fear, and fear erodes resistance faster than violence ever could. There are moments when the city feels almost peaceful. Without imperial tithes, ration distribution improves. Without constant surveillance, people speak more freely, laugh more openly. The absence of distant authority creates a fragile sense of local autonomy. For a time, it is possible to believe that this occupation is simply another regime change, no worse than the last. That belief is the most dangerous lie chaos tells because it is partially true. Then the costs escalate. The demonic presence intensifies, no longer content to lurk at the edges of perception. Possessions become common, sometimes voluntary, sometimes not. Entire hab blocks are sealed off after rituals go wrong, their screams echoing through ventilation shafts for days. The sky above the city begins to change, clouds twisting into unnatural formations that pulse faintly with inner light. Astrological phenomena, once dismissed as superstition, become daily reality, and with them comes the creeping understanding that the world itself is being reshaped. Civilians feel it in their bodies. Time behaves inconsistently. Hunger comes and goes without warning. Wounds heal too quickly or not at all. Emotions spike unpredictably, rage and ecstasy bleeding into one another until it becomes difficult to tell where one ends and the other begins. The promise of power no longer feels abstract. It is intimate, invasive, and increasingly difficult to refuse. Some still pray to the emperor, quietly, desperately, framing their pleas in terms of rumor and memory rather than certainty. They speak of a distant light, of guidance felt rather than seen. These prayers go unanswered, or perhaps they are answered in ways no one can recognize anymore. Faith without reinforcement withers, and chaos offers constant feedback. By the time imperial reinforcements finally appear on long-range auspex, it is too late to frame the situation as liberation. The cult leaders prepare defenses with fanatical efficiency. Civilians are armed, armored, and indoctrinated. Many are eager to fight, not out of loyalty to chaos itself, but out of fear of losing the strange, terrible stability they have carved out. The Imperium, when it returns, will bring fire and judgment without distinction. Chaos, for all its horrors, has at least learned their names. As orbital bombardment calculations begin far above, unseen and unheard, the people of the city brace themselves. They do not know which god will claim them next. They only know that survival has already demanded more than they thought they could give. And somewhere in the shifting architecture of the warp, something stirs, pleased by how easily humanity learns to live in its shadow. The moment the Imperium returns, it does not feel like salvation. It feels like judgment arriving without context. Sirens howl across the city for the first time in months, their tones unfamiliar, repurposed, struggling to assert an authority long since eroded. Civilians look up instinctively when the sky burns, when contrails of descending warcraft carve bright scars through cloud cover that no longer behaves like cloud should. For some, the sight triggers relief so intense it borders on pain. For others, it brings only dread, because they know what the Imperium does to worlds it considers compromised. From orbit, the planet is already categorized. The decision-makers far above see a pattern of warp instability, confirmed cult activity, structural contamination. They do not see families huddled in basements, or children clutching symbols they do not fully understand, or workers who simply learn to obey whoever fed them. To the Imperium, these distinctions are inefficiencies. Compliance is binary. Purity is absolute. The first landings are surgical. Adeptus Astartes strike teams descend into key districts, their arrival marked by thunderous impact and the crack of displaced air. To civilians watching from shattered windows, they look like avenging gods, armored giants wreathed in smoke and flame. The effect is immediate and overwhelming. Cult enforcers scatter or are obliterated in moments. Demonic entities are banished in explosions of unreality that leave behind scorched stone and nauseating afterimages. For a brief, fragile window, hope flares. Then the purges begin. Imperial Guard regiments follow in disciplined waves, lasguns sweeping alleys and hab blocks with methodical precision. Vox Grill's bark orders civilians barely understand. Curfews are enforced at gunpoint. Entire populations are herded into processing zones for screening. The tests are swift and merciless. Those who show obvious mutation are executed on the spot. Those who hesitate too long, who cannot recite the proper litanies, who bear unfamiliar scars or symbols, are detained for further evaluation. Few of those detained are ever seen again. Civilians struggle to reconcile the return of imperial authority with the reality of its methods. The Imperium does not negotiate. It does not ask why chaos took root here, or how desperation hollowed out faith until something else could fill the space. It does not care that some cult leaders genuinely protected their people, or that others simply exploited a vacuum the Imperium created. All of it is heresy. All of it must burn. The ecclesiarchy returns in force, their sermons no longer gentle, no longer adaptive. They speak of cleansing fire, of righteous suffering, of the emperor's mercy expressed through annihilation. Shrines are reconsecrated with promethium and blood. Symbols once tolerated under chaos are smashed, their bearers dragged screaming into the open. Civilians are ordered to denounce one another, to prove loyalty through accusation. Old grudges resurface, sharpened by fear and the promise of survival. Some comply eagerly, others comply because refusal means death. The fighting intensifies as remaining cult cells dig in, bolstered by warp-born allies that refuse to be banished quietly. Entire districts become killing fields, their architecture reshaped by artillery and reality-warping energies alike. Civilians caught between advancing imperial lines and entrenched cultists learn quickly that there is no safe direction. Shelters collapse. Streets flood with ash and debris. The air becomes a constant haze of smoke, incense, and burned flesh. In the midst of this, something profound shifts within the population. The illusion that either side represents safety finally shatters. Chaos offered meaning at the cost of humanity. The Imperium offers survival at the cost of mercy. For civilians who have lived under both, the difference feels increasingly academic. Rumors spread through the ruins, of entire hab blocks marked for exterminatus consideration, of commanders requesting orbital strikes rather than risk further contamination, of a timetable measured not in days, but in acceptable casualty thresholds. Civilians listen to these whispers and understand that they are already dead by most calculations. What remains is only the manner of it. Some attempt to flee, braving war zones and warp-scarred outskirts in the hope of reaching evacuation points. Few succeed. Others barricade themselves in, clinging to whatever faith remains, praying not for rescue, but for quick death. And a small, dangerous number begin to consider a third option. Not chaos, not the Imperium. Survival on their own terms. In the shadows between battles, groups form that refuse both banners. They sabotage supply lines, misdirect patrols, hide the unmutated among the condemned. They are hunted relentlessly by both sides, deemed traitors by the Imperium and apostates by chaos. Their existence is precarious, brutal, and short-lived. But for a moment, they represent something almost unthinkable in this universe: choice. As the war grinds on and the body count rises into numbers too large to mourn, civilians begin to understand the final truth of occupation, no matter the flag it flies. Order is never about protecting the powerless. It is about managing them. And in that realization, something inside the city hardens, waiting to see which tyrant will blink first. The third option does not last. It never does. The Imperium is too vast, chaos too patient, and civilians too exhausted to sustain defiance for long. The groups that tried to live between banners are crushed methodically, their safe routes exposed, their caches burned, their leaders executed as examples. Voxcasters broadcast their deaths as warnings, framed differently depending on who controls the frequency at the time. To the Imperium, they are traitors who refused purification. To chaos, they are weak-minded fools who rejected ascension. The truth matters to no one with the power to act on it. As the days blur into one continuous siege, the city becomes unrecognizable even to those who never left it. Streets are rerouted by rubble. Landmarks vanish beneath shell craters and warped growths that resist demolition. The sky remains a constant, sickly glow, lit by fires that never fully go out and phenomena no one dares to name aloud. Civilians stop looking up. Looking up invites despair. The Imperium escalates. Astra Militarum artillery pounds entire districts into flattened grids, sacrificing infrastructure for certainty. The logic is brutal but internally consistent. You cannot hide heresy in ash. You cannot corrupt what no longer exists. Each barrage is followed by slow, grinding advances, infantry moving through ruins with flamers and bayonets, purging anything that moves too strangely or prays too quietly. The sound becomes a constant background roar, a thunder that seeps into sleep and memory alike. Within the processing zones, the reality is quieter and more intimate. Civilians stand in endless lines under the watchful eyes of armed guards and robed officials. Medici teams scan for signs of corruption with instruments whose workings are never explained. Questions are asked, answers recorded, decisions rendered in seconds. Families are separated without ceremony. Children are taken for reassignment or further testing. Parents are told this is mercy. The word tastes like ash. Some civilians attempt to perform purity. They scrub their skin raw, recite litanies until their voices crack, destroy anything in their possession that could be misinterpreted. It does not help. Purity is not a state you can prove under these conditions. It is a presumption granted from above, and this world has already lost that privilege. Chaos does not retreat so much as it condenses. The warp presence tightens around specific strongholds, pouring power into fewer, more devastating manifestations. Demons stalk the ruins openly now, no longer bothering with subtlety. Cult champions emerge, twisted into forms that reflect obsession rather than strategy. These beings do not seek to rule the city. They seek to make a statement, to leave scars deep enough that even if the Imperium wins, it will never truly erase what happened here. Civilians caught in these zones experience a different kind of horror. Chaos does not kill efficiently. It plays. It transforms fear into spectacle, turning bodies into symbols and suffering into devotion. Some are broken by it, surrendering themselves willingly just to make the terror stop. Others cling to whatever fragment of sanity remains, hiding in silence and darkness, praying to anything that might listen. Between these extremes, something erodes that cannot be rebuilt. Trust. Neighbors eye one another with suspicion, weighing every word, every gesture. A whispered prayer could be loyalty or heresy. A hidden symbol could mean survival or execution. Informants emerge not out of malice but desperation. Turning someone in becomes a way to buy time, to shift attention away from oneself. The Imperium encourages this. Chaos exploits it. The result is the same. Isolation becomes the default state of existence. As casualties mount, higher authorities make their calculations. The planet's strategic value is weighed against the cost of continued engagement. Data scrolls are updated, probabilities adjusted. Civilians do not hear these discussions, but they feel the consequences in the form of tightening timeframes and increasingly indiscriminate tactics. When a world reaches this stage, its fate is no longer a question of if, but how thoroughly. Rumors of exterminatus spread again, stronger this time. Some dismiss them as psychological warfare. Others begin to prepare for it, hoarding supplies they know they will never use, writing messages no one will read. A few embrace the idea with a kind of weary relief. There are worse endings than fire that does not linger. In the final weeks, the city's population dwindles to a fraction of what it once was. Those still alive move like ghosts through the ruins, gaunt and hollow-eyed. The sounds of battle fade intermittently, replaced by an oppressive quiet that feels unnatural, like a held breath. Even chaos seems to pause, as if aware that the moment of decision is approaching. On one shattered balcony overlooking a burned-out plaza, A civilian watches Imperial troops advance under a sky that flickers with unnatural light. He cannot remember when he last slept without dreaming of screams. He cannot remember the last time he believed in anything without reservation. All he knows is that both sides claim righteousness, and both demand everything. When the order finally comes down from orbit, it is not announced to the people below. There is no warning siren, no final sermon, just a subtle shift in the air, a sense of inevitability settling over the ruins. Somewhere far above, weapons are armed, coordinates locked, and a world's worth of suffering is reduced to a tactical consideration. Whether the fire falls or the Imperium stays its hand is a decision made beyond civilian comprehension. But one truth remains, etched into the bones of everyone who lived through occupation and reclamation alike. No one was saved here. Some merely lasted longer than others. And in the long memory of the Imperium, that distinction will never matter. If exterminatus does not come, it is not because mercy prevails. It is because the world still has something left to take. The order that filters down through command Vox networks is subtle, almost anticlimactic. Orbital weapons remain armed but unfired. Firestorm patterns are revised. Containment replaces annihilation. For the civilians still alive, the change is imperceptible at first. There is no announcement that they have been spared. There is only the continuation of suffering under a slightly altered shape. The Imperium does not rebuild immediately. It secures. Adeptus Arbite's precincts are re-established amid the ruins, their black-armored patrols imposing a different kind of silence than chaos ever did. Where cult enforcers demanded devotion, the Arbites demand compliance without explanation. Curfews tight. Travel between districts becomes nearly impossible without authorization seals few civilians can obtain. Vox traffic is restricted, monitored, scrubbed of anything resembling unregulated thought. The city becomes a series of sealed compartments, each isolated from the next, each easier to control than a living whole. For civilians, survival shifts again, this time into something colder and more rigid. Food is distributed according to new purity tiers. Labor assignments are mandatory, brutal, and unending. Manufactorums that survive the fighting roar back to life, their output redirected toward weapons and infrastructure for other wars. The people who work them do so under constant surveillance, watched by auspex arrays and overseers who do not bother pretending their authority is temporary. Chaos corrupted bodies. The Imperium claims what remains of them. The ecclesiarchy returns with a vengeance sharpened by humiliation. Their sermons no longer seek to inspire. They instruct. Every word is chosen to reinforce guilt, to frame survival itself as a debt owed. Civilians are told that living through occupation was a failure of faith, that contamination is not an event but a stain that must be worked off through endless penance. Shrines are rebuilt larger than before, their walls thick with votive plaques bearing names of the dead, the disappeared, the condemned. No one knows who decides which names are honored and which are erased. Children are taken early. Some are deemed salvageable, inducted into Schola Progenium programs or reassigned to distant worlds where their origins will be forgotten. Others are sent for further testing, their futures sealed behind closed doors and redacted files. Parents are not allowed to ask questions. Questions imply doubt, and doubt implies weakness. Weakness, the sermons remind them, is how chaos entered in the first place. The memory of occupation becomes dangerous. Talking about it openly is discouraged, then punished. Official histories are distributed through sanctioned channels, their language precise and bloodless. Chaos is described as an external infection, sudden and overwhelming, with no mention of the desperation that allowed it to grow. Civilians learn to correct themselves mid-sentence, to replace lived experience with approved phrasing. What cannot be spoken begins to rot in the mind. Yet the scars remain. Warp taint lingers in subtle ways the Imperium cannot fully erase. Machinery misbehaves at random intervals. Dreams return unbidden, vivid, and unsettling. Some civilians feel a persistent sense of being watched, not by demons, but by something more abstract, a residue of attention that never fully withdrew. The Imperium labels these symptoms post-contamination stress and prescribes labor and prayer as treatment. It is not enough. Within the Arbeits processing centers, interrogations continue long after the fighting has ceased. Individuals are questioned repeatedly, sometimes years apart, about the same events, the same associations. The goal is not truth, it is exhaustion. Eventually, most people will confess to something, if only to make the question stop. Confession creates a record. Records justify further control. Civilians begin to understand the final cruelty of reclamation. Chaos took their bodies, their faith, their sense of reality. The Imperium takes their narrative. It decides not only what happened, but what it meant, and who is allowed to remember it differently. In the deeper levels of the city, sealed zones remain untouched, too contaminated or unstable to cleanse cheaply. These areas are walled off and forgotten officially, but not erased. People live near them, work near them, feel their presence like a bruise beneath the skin. Sometimes lights flicker near the barriers. Sometimes voices carry through ventilation shafts that should be inert. Reports are filed. Nothing is done. The world is declared compliant. From orbit, it appears pacified, its population reduced to manageable numbers, its output restored to acceptable levels. Tithes resume. Ships depart. Attention shifts elsewhere. To the Imperium, this is success. For the civilians left behind, it is something else entirely. They have learned that order does not mean safety. That survival does not mean forgiveness. That faith, whether in gods or institutions, is something that can be weaponized against the very people it claims to protect. As the city settles into its new, rigid rhythm, beneath banners freshly painted and laws newly enforced, the people wait, not for rescue, not for rebellion, but for the next change. Because in the Imperium, peace is never permanent. And on this world, everyone knows exactly how quickly it can be taken away. Time passes, but it does not heal. It stratifies. Layers of obedience settle over older layers of trauma, pressing down until the past feels less like memory and more like pressure. Civilians learn the new rules quickly because the penalty for misunderstanding them is absolute. Identification checks become routine. Surveillance servitors drift through streets rebuilt just enough to function, their lenses lingering a second too long on faces that show too much emotion. Even relief must be moderated. Excess joy invites scrutiny as surely as despair once did. The city learns to perform compliance the way it once performed faith. Manufactorum shifts stretch longer than before, justified as necessary to repay the cost of reclamation. The phrase becomes common in official rhetoric, repeated until it loses meaning. Reclamation implies recovery, yet nothing here feels reclaimed. It feels repossessed. Civilians are reminded constantly that their survival represents a continued investment by the Imperium, one that must be justified through productivity and silence. Gratitude is expected. Gratitude is monitored. Those who survived chaos occupation carry invisible markers that no auspex can fully detect. They flinch at certain sounds. They avoid certain words. They hesitate before answering even the simplest questions, running through internal filters shaped by months of contradictory authority. The Imperium interprets this hesitation as guilt. Interrogations resume. Files are reopened. The war is over, but the suspicion never ends. In some quarters, the Arbeits establish permanent tribunals, operating without jury or public record. Sentences are delivered swiftly, often without explanation. Civilians are marched away in silence, their absence folded into daily routine with practiced indifference. Everyone knows someone who disappeared after saying the wrong thing at the wrong time. Everyone knows better than to ask where they went. The ecclesiarchy intensifies its grip on meaning. New feast days are declared, commemorating deliverance that few feel. Processions march through half-ruined streets, incense struggling to mask the smell of old smoke and fresh fear. Civilians kneel because kneeling is required, because standing invites attention. The sermons insist that doubt is the enemy's final weapon, that questioning the Imperium's methods risks reopening the door to damnation. The logic is airtight. The cost is unbearable. Children grow up inside this logic without realizing it is one. They learn history from sanitized data slates that frame chaos as an external monstrosity with no roots in neglect or desperation. They learn that survival was a miracle granted by distant authority, not something clawed out by their parents at unimaginable cost. When they ask about sealed districts or missing names, they are told those topics are inappropriate, or worse, dangerous. Curiosity becomes something to be trained out of them early. Still, cracks remain. In quiet moments when work quotas are met and surveillance slackens just enough to breathe, civilians share fragments of truth in coded language. A glance, a pause, a carefully chosen phrase that acknowledges shared memory without articulating it. These exchanges are fleeting and fragile, but they matter. They are proof that something human persists beneath the imposed narrative. The Imperium tolerates this to a point. Absolute control is inefficient. Allowing minor emotional release prevents larger instability. This calculus is as cold as it is effective. Civilians are permitted to remember, so long as their memories never coalesce into anything actionable. The sealed zones continue to loom at the edges of the city, their barriers maintained but never dismantled. Officially, they are condemned. Unofficially, they are reminders. The Imperium does not erase failure. It quarantines it, studies it, and moves on. Sometimes distant thunder rolls from behind the walls, accompanied by flickers of unnatural light. Reports are filed. The zones remain sealed. Life continues. People marry. Children are born. Old habits resurface in altered forms. The city begins to resemble a functioning world again, at least from a distance. Ships arrive to collect tithes. Officials depart with satisfied reports. On paper, the planet is stable. But stability built on terror has a shelf life. Every civilian knows, deep down, that what happened here can happen again. Not because chaos is inevitable, but because neglect is. Because authority stretched too thin always leaves gaps, and gaps are invitations. The Imperium's return closed one door and locked many others, but it did not address why the first door opened at all. In the end, that knowledge becomes the heaviest burden of survival. Not the memory of demons or fire or screams in the dark, but the understanding that no side truly stood for them. That they were resources to be claimed, corrected, or expended. That living through occupation and reclamation did not make them stronger, only more aware. As years pass and scars fade into infrastructure, the city settles into a rhythm indistinguishable from countless others across the Imperium. Its people work, pray, obey, and endure. From the outside, it is just another world doing its duty. From within, it is a warning no one will ever hear. And somewhere in the silence between patrols and prayers, a question lingers, unspoken and unanswered. If this is salvation, what would damnation have looked like? The years that follow do not announce themselves as aftermath. They feel like erosion. The city does not remember the moment it became something else, only that one day the weight of living here felt heavier than it should. Buildings are repaired just enough to stand. Streets are cleared just enough to march through. Everything functions and nothing heals. Civilians learn to measure time not by festivals or milestones, but by inspection cycles and quota revisions. Survival becomes procedural. The Imperium calls this recovery. Children born after the occupation grow up surrounded by fragments of a history they are never allowed to fully touch. They play in courtyards built over mass graves, recite litanies written to overwrite memories they never had, and learn early that some questions produce silence instead of answers. Their parents watch them carefully, not with the open fear that once defined their lives, but with something quieter and more corrosive: calculation. What can be said? What must be hidden? What might one day be used against them? The city teaches this lesson relentlessly. Servitors patrol streets where neighbors once whispered cult prayers, their augmetic limbs scraping stone in a rhythm that becomes part of the background noise of existence. Vought speakers deliver daily affirmations of imperial order, their voices smooth, measured, devoid of passion. Civilians respond automatically, their mouths forming words their minds barely register. Faith, stripped of mystery, becomes compliance with aesthetic trappings. And yet beneath the surface, something persists. Not chaos, not openly. The warp scars are mostly dormant now, sealed behind wards and bureaucracy, but residue lingers in subtler forms. Certain dreams recur across unrelated households, sharing imagery no sanctioned text contains. Certain melodies emerge independently in different districts, hummed without conscious intent. The Imperium categorizes these phenomena as psychological aftereffects. It does not investigate too closely. Some truths are more dangerous than heresy. The survivors age quickly. Those who live through occupation carry the weight of it in their posture, their speech, the way their eyes track exits without realizing it. They have learned that authority is not inherently righteous, only powerful. That protection always carries a price, and that price is rarely paid by those who demand it. They teach their children obedience not because they believe in it, but because they know what happens to those who cannot perform it convincingly enough. Occasionally, an off-worlder arrives. Administratum officials, trade envoys, pilgrims passing through unsanctioned routes. They see a functioning city, scarred but loyal, its people dutiful and quiet. They record statistics, approve shipments, move on. Some remark on the efficiency of the local population, how quickly order was restored after contamination. These comments are repeated with pride by local authorities, proof that the world learned its lesson. The civilians hear these remarks and say nothing. They have learned that truth is not something you speak. It is something you carry quietly until it reshapes you or crushes you entirely. Some choose to let it crush them. Others find ways to compartmentalize, to live small lives within the margins allowed. A few, very few, attempt to preserve fragments of memory in hidden forms. Coded stories, altered prayers, symbols disguised as decoration. These efforts are fragile, dangerous, and often short-lived, but they exist. The sealed zones remain. Time has not softened them. If anything, they feel heavier now, as though the world itself resents being forced to forget what lies beyond those barriers. Maintenance crews report anomalies they cannot explain. Auspex readings fluctuate without pattern. The official response is always the same: restrict access, increase surveillance, issue reassurances. Civilians learn to avoid the areas instinctively, crossing streets or altering routes without conscious thought. In moments of solitude, some civilians still pray. Not loudly, not formally. They pray the way drowning people grasp for air without structure or certainty. They do not know who listens, if anyone. They only know that something once answered quickly and at terrible cost, and that silence, however cold, feels safer by comparison. Faith becomes an act of restraint rather than devotion. The Imperium continues on. Wars rage elsewhere. Crusades are launched. Entire sectors burn and are forgotten. This world is a footnote now, a line item marked compliant and productive. No one writes songs about it. No heroes are named here. Its greatest contribution is that it did not fail loudly enough to warrant total erasure. And that, perhaps, is the cruelest outcome of all. Because the civilians who live here understand something most of the Imperium never will. That chaos did not conquer their world with force alone, and the Imperium did not save it with righteousness. Both relied on the same truth: that ordinary people will endure almost anything, if enduring is the only option left. And as the city breathes in its new, imposed normality, beneath layers of law and prayer and fear, the question that has haunted it since the first occupation never truly leaves. What happens next? The answer, when it finally comes, is not dramatic. There is no second invasion, no flare of warplight on the horizon, no thunder of descending armies. What comes next arrives the way everything else has on this world, quietly, incrementally, wrapped in procedure and inevitability. The city endures. Years stack atop one another until memory blurs into something almost mythic. The occupation becomes a reference point rather than a wound spoken of obliquely, if at all. Official anniversaries commemorate deliverance with sanctioned imagery and carefully curated language. The dates are observed, the rites performed, and afterward the population returns to work with practiced efficiency. Mourning is not forbidden. It is simply regulated. Those who remember too clearly grow old. They become background figures, stooped and silent, their knowledge rendered obsolete by time and disinterest. When they speak, younger generations listen politely, then move on. The past they describe feels exaggerated, unreal, incompatible with the rigid order of the present. This is how trauma finally loses its edge, not through understanding but through irrelevance. And yet, the city has changed in ways that cannot be fully undone. Civilians no longer assume the Imperium is permanent. They obey it, serve it, and rely on it, but without illusion. Authority is treated the way weather is treated, dangerous, unpredictable, and beyond appeal. When supply chains falter or officials rotate too quickly, people adapt instinctively, stockpiling quietly, cultivating informal networks beneath the surface of sanctioned systems. These habits are never named as resistance. They are simply life. Children raised under post-occupation rule learn caution as a second language. They know how to speak properly in public and more honestly in private. They understand that truth depends on audience, and that survival often requires contradiction. To the Imperium, they are model citizens. To their families, they are something more complicated, proof that endurance can be taught, even if innocence cannot. The sealed zones are never reopened. Eventually, they fade from conversation entirely, existing only as blank spaces on maps and instincts in the gut. New construction avoids them. Transit routes curve around them. The city grows asymmetrically, shaped by an absence everyone accepts but no one explains. In rare cases, unauthorized expeditions vanish into those forgotten districts. Their disappearance is noted, filed, and forgotten in turn. From time to time, distant rumors surface. A ship lost in transit after passing through the system. An astropathic message garbled beyond recognition. A dream shared by multiple individuals who have never met. None of it is enough to warrant alarm. None of it is enough to ignore completely. The Imperium excels at living in that space between. For most civilians, the future becomes a narrow corridor defined by work, obedience, and quiet personal rituals that mean nothing to anyone else. Some find contentment there, or something close enough to sustain them. Others carry a persistent sense of wrongness they cannot articulate, an understanding that something fundamental was broken and then paved over. They do not rebel. Rebellion requires belief in alternatives, and belief has been carefully managed here. Instead, they endure, generation after generation, contributing their labor, their children, and eventually their lives to a structure too vast to notice individual suffering unless it becomes inefficient. This is how chaos truly loses. Not through defeat, but through being made unnecessary. And this is how the Imperium truly wins. Not by saving souls, but by ensuring that no one expects to be saved again. In the end, the city becomes indistinguishable from countless others scattered across the stars. Its skyline is scarred but functional. Its people are compliant but wary. Its history is archived, redacted, and rarely accessed. From orbit, it is a success story. From the ground, it is a lesson. That living under chaos teaches civilians how fragile order really is. That living under the Imperium teaches them how conditional protection can be. And that surviving both does not make one stronger or wiser, only quieter. The city goes on breathing recycled air beneath a sky it no longer questions, its people waking each day to routines designed to outlast memory itself. Somewhere in the endless machinery of the Imperium, this world is marked as stable. Those who live there know better. Stability is not peace. It is simply the absence of immediate catastrophe. And in a universe like this, that is the closest most civilians will ever come to safety.